Hi, it's Alistair McIntyre for Electric Scotland. This video is actually to support my weekly newsletter. I'm considering doing this on an ongoing basis because I thought maybe if you get an idea of what's in the newsletter and why I put up the various articles, that might lead you to read the full newsletter and click on the links to read the material I put up this week. Essentially, Electric Scotland's really about the history and culture of Scotland and the Scots, and also people of Scots descent around the world. I also run the site electriccanadian.com, which focused mainly initially on the Scots connections in Canada, but has now progressed to being more of general history about Canada as well. So I usually will put something up on that site most weeks as well, so I'll tell you about that as I go through it. When you open the newsletter, I'll normally have a kind of Electric Scotland news, which is a bit about what I'm doing and stuff like that, or maybe highlighting an event that's going on that I think would be worth you knowing about. And then really I give you a synopsis of the Scottish news feed, because if you go to the electricscotland.com site and scroll down the page a little, you'll see I've got a feed there which is called the Scot news feed. That was designed because essentially people were telling me they don't really have the time to read the newspapers and stuff like that, and they'd hoped they could find a source for maybe a week's news of what's going on in Scotland. And so I was asked if I could create something, and basically the Scots newsfeed is essentially about that. But also, because I'm a history site, what is news today is obviously history tomorrow. And obviously there's a huge amount going on about independence in Scotland, IndyRef 2, the Brexit deal. I mean, all of this has big implications for Scotland. So I'm doing my best to read on a daily basis what's going on and what might affect Scotland and so forth. So the news stories are what I find. I'm thinking this is an interesting story. Whether you agree with the story or not is kind of immaterial. The thing is that it's out there, people are reading it, and they're making up their minds whether to believe it or not. And in quite a few of the links that I'm providing to these because the Scot News is really just a headline and then a short description of the article and then a link to the article on whatever website it's on. And a lot of these sites that I put links to, there are comments which you can add and you can read basically. So, without more ado, this newsletter is for May the 26th, 2017, and the kind of news stories I've got for this week are Police Scotland changes course. This is the recent launch of Police Scotland's 10-year strategy. Policing 2026 marked a turning point for Scottish policing on several counts. And so that's like one story I picked which I thought might be interesting. You click the link on it and you can go read the story essentially on Skeptical Scot. Next one is let's debate different models for student fees and grants. As you know, students get free education in Scotland, but clearly there's a case for looking at whether we should be doing something different or not. Then I've got thousands of police on the beat without current background checks. It's the next story I chose because I'm thinking to myself, you know, you're hearing, I mean, certainly in Canada, I'm hearing a lot about the RCMP who are, basically there's so many sex cases going on in Canada that people are starting to wonder if the RCMP is fit for purpose anymore. And clearly background checks to show a person is worthy for being a police officer and thus looking after us is clearly important. So when I read about this, I thought, you know, that's something we should know about. So that's why that one's in. The next one I have up is the Common Agricultural Policy. Basically, what is it? And obviously, as we're talking about these kind of things, I think it's good that we learn what these kind of policies are and how it affects us within the EU. Then I've got SNP's 10 years in power, looking more like a lost decade. Basically, it's kind of highlighting, I'm thinking, the lack of progress Scotland's made in the last 10 years. But it's also a wider discussion about what has devolution got for Scotland? What have we got out of it? So again, it's a case of reading it. Those that are for independence clearly won't like it, I would imagine, but at the same time, by at least reading it, you can understand various points of view. I've also put up a copy of People's News. This is a PDF magazine which I've been reading for some time. It's Irish. It's the People's Movement there. And they quite often talk about things to do with the EU, which I find kind of interesting, because you don't read about a lot of things that go on in there, and this is one publication where you do get a bit of an inside story. So that's why I linked that to there. Then another headline is overseas investment in Scotland plummets. I thought that doesn't sound very good, so I thought I should read the article and understand what's going on, and again link to that. And then I found an article, it's from Victoria Hutcheson, What I Do in Scottish History. I just discovered this week. There's a series of blogs where people tell you what they do about working in the Scottish in Scottish history, around the world for that matter. And I was very interested in her discussions. The discussion that she's talking about, she's working in the Middle Ages, looking at the monastic institutions that we had then, and I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. So I put a link to that. Then I've got, I read an article in Think Scotland, it was about thorium. It says Britain should become an optimistic nation by backing thorium for power generation. And having read it, I entirely agreed with the article, and I'm thinking to myself, are Scotland doing anything about this? Are we looking at it? Because I haven't heard anything about this before. So I thought that's worth looking at. Then there's a strong economic case for women's equality. And again, I thought that was a good story, and I thought, well, worth reading, because after all, if women get pay equality, that can actually improve things in Scotland. So again, I thought it was a worthwhile article, worth reading. Then another story I put up, which was The Bird That Saved My Team from Oblivion. That was a great wee story, actually. It's about a supporter coming down from the Outer Isles to support his team down in towards the south of Scotland, and how, well, I won't spoil the story, but certainly I thought it was a very charming story, and that's why I put that link in. Then we got UK potential financial liabilities. We've been hearing a lot recently about the 100 billion that the EU are saying that you'll have to pay as a divorce settlement. Well, this article kind of poo-poos all that and goes into some detail why. And again, I thought that was an interesting article. And then next one was designing a post-Brexit agricultural policy. Well, I have to say that I've always done quite a lot on the site about agriculture and history. And I thought, well, this is a potential minefield here. And I wanted to understand more about what the challenges might be. Again, I thought this article was relevant and that would give me some background. Then there's a wee story about Twitter delights Scottish users with saltire emoji. So again, I thought, well, that's kind of interesting because there's a lot of Twitter users around. Then next was Audit Scotland, lays out 5 principles for IT project success. As you probably heard, the police IT project's been a disaster, and also the EU farm payments computer system was another disaster. So I thought, great, this is an article which will probably tell us about that, but not only that, suggests ways that we can do better. And I thought that it's incumbent on us to learn more about that, and that's why that's up. Then I found the Brexit flashcards. These are downloadable, pithy summaries of some of the reasons why it is right to be leaving the EU and answering some of the questions. And I had a wee look at that, did download a copy, and I thought that's kind of interesting, so I put a link to it. Then we got Brexit brings the chance to end 40 years of damage to our fishing communities. Well, I've been very vocal on this for many years now, the fact that we've lost 100,000 jobs in our fishing industry thanks to the EU policies, and we lost something like 2 billion in annual revenue, and I've always thought that just destroyed our rural communities. And so I was really interested to read this article. Then, of course, one I put in was family confirmed Barra teenager's death. You know, this is the horrible bomb attack at the Manchester Arena. And the people in Barra were wondering about two girls that had gone to the concert. One we now know has died, and the other, I'm told, is seriously ill in hospital. So this is a little bit of an article about that. Then one was River Clyde, healthier and stench-free. I thought, yes, salmon are able to access parts of the River Clyde for the first time in decades, following work to improve water quality and remove barriers. So I thought, well, that's great, and I thought, let's read that. Then another wee story is the Atholl Highlanders get set for their Blair Castle parade, bearing in mind that the Atholl Highlanders are the only private army, and they were created by Queen Victoria in 1844. So again, I thought it was an interesting article. And the final news story I put up was Lochalsh Junior Point Band are British champions. So that's great. Lochalsh is doing well again. So these were the news articles that I hope some of these might be of interest for you to read. I then have a section in the newsletter for Electric Canadian, which is my electriccanadian.com website. And I've been working on the Chronicles of Canada. This was a 32-volume set. And they were kind of lighter. I mean, they weren't heavy to read, they were quite light. And I found some PDF files of all but one of the volumes. Though I have to say they weren't terribly good quality in that they were readable, but they chopped off 2 or 3 letters from the left on the right hand side of the page, which made it a wee bit difficult to read. But then as I tried to find better copies, I actually found the whole set as text files. And further to that, I then found that there's audio recordings of all these volumes. So if you go to that page, you'll be able to pick out whatever volume you want, and you can either read it as a PDF file or a text file, or you could go to the link I produced and get it read to you. The other story in Electric Canadian this time is the Women's Canadian Historical Society. This is Transactions 25, which is the colony of French emigres in York County in 1798. That's the last of those ones I'm putting up as well, because I found a small collection of them, and that is the final one. But the link goes to the index page for these stories, so you can read some of the other ones as well. And then what I've taken to do over the last several newsletters is that I've always been a great fan of Conrad Black. I like the way he writes, and I like his ideas, and I have to say I've got a lot of sympathy for what he writes, and so he usually puts up 2 blog posts every week. And so what I've taken to doing is I've been highlighting the subject of each and putting a link to them. So by clicking the links, you'll be able to read both of his stories. One this week is about calling for Trump's impeachment is a cynical attempt to criminalize political differences. And the other article is Trump turns the corner, which is clearly because he's doing quite successful in the Middle East on this visit, and certainly got a whole pile of money, which is going to create a lot of jobs in America, which is what he promised to do, of course. So that's it for this week in Electric Canadian. Now on the Electric Scotland front, I found a whole collection of the Fulford Directory and yearbooks. And one of the directories, so if any of your ancestors are from the Fulford area, these will be great resources for you, because it lists pretty well all the people in the area. But what I particularly was interested in is there's a section right about halfway through the book which gives you lots of little stories. And what I've taken to doing is, as I put one up each week, and I've got a few more weeks to go on this one, I will see out a couple of wee stories from each of the issues, but there's a lot more of those stories. Like, for example, the stories this week I've got are for the Scott Monument, and because of the Scott Monument's actually, well, it says the Scott Monument in the East Princes Street Gardens at Edinburgh has secured the admiration of Europe and the appreciation of the highest judge of architects in every country. It has the form of a beautiful Gothic spire, 200 feet in height, with Scott's statue underneath the canopy. The monument was erected at a cost of about £16,000 and is adorned with statues of prominent characters in Scott's works and with likenesses of famous Scottish poets. It was designed by George Michael Kemp, the son of a shepherd on the Pentland Hills, who, when a boy of 10, had his enthusiasm stirred by a visit he paid to Roslin Chapel, and subsequently devoted his life to the study of Gothic architecture. So it goes on a little bit further than that. But I've also put a link under that too, because we do have actually a little biography of him, and I thought if you're interested in him, then click that link and you can read that as well. And the other story is about the name Smith. How many possible ways are there of spelling the famous name of Smith? And that article tells you a little bit about that. Then the next book I put up this week was Egypt and Cynthia. Basically, I read somewhere this week as I was reading, as I read all the time, of course, I find references to things and I think, oh, that's interesting, I follow it up. And they're saying that they think a lot of the Picts in Scotland were descended from the Cynthians. And I thought, that's kind of interesting. I thought, what do I have on the Cynthians? And I have absolutely nothing on the Cynthians on the website. So I thought, time I rectified that. And the one book I found which seemed to be pretty good was this book about Egypt and Cynthia. And bearing in mind that we've still got connections from Egypt as well, I thought, well, that would be a good resource to put up. And that's basically what I've done. Also, in the same article that I read that got my interest in Cynthia, they were talking about the Magi. And again, I went and found this, The Treasure of the Magi, a study of modern something or other by James Hope Moulton, which was printed in 1917. So I thought, well, I'll put that up because that would be kind of interesting. And then the next story is about what has devolution done for Scotland. Basically, there's something I've been working on over the last number of weeks. I've been trying to ascertain what Scotland's got out of devolution, and actually it's very difficult to find an answer to that question. I mean, I've searched and searched and searched, and I found a few articles which talk about it, and again, on this particular page I put links to that, but it's a question of to me, we need to learn, and there's no having a devolved government. If it's not serving Scotland well, what do we need to do to make it better? And it's all part of this discussion about independent Scotland. I mean, should we be independent? Should we not be independent? And of course, in the last referendum, we had quite a split between the yes and no's, and that's been going on constantly ever since. So I think anything that discusses about how we're doing as a country within the UK should be something that we should take an interest in. So that's a good article, and I'm hoping that you might want to read it and see what it's about. It's actually a video that I actually made, and it was a result of reading all kinds of things. And I'm thinking to myself, maybe there's a way we could get a discussion going. And of course the link is to the Scotland.org website, which is a little social media site where you can have longer conversations about things. So I'm hoping that might be something that you might find worth watching. The next book I put up this week is about Francis Hutcheson, his life, teaching and position in the history of philosophy. Again, you maybe heard of David Hume. Well, this guy, Francis Hutcheson, preceded him. And so I felt that, and again, he's a Scot, I mean, that's why he's elected Scotland. So I thought to myself, with his Scots-Irish background, that I thought it would be interesting to learn more about him. And again, I had a small biography of him, but I found this much larger book about him, so I thought I'd add that. I mean, bearing in mind, over the many years I've been running Elected Scotland, I've got tons of little biographies up of loads of Scots. But over the years, I've gradually found complete books about them. And so where I found them, I tried to go to that smaller biography page and put a link to the full biography of him. So while I have a section under the book section of Elected Scotland, if you go there and see autobiographies, biographies, click that. And I've got about 100 biographies there, but there's actually hundreds more throughout the site based on like significant Scots section and famous Scots section and so forth. But I think it was interesting reading about him. The other biography I put up this time, this is actually an autobiography. It's the life of George H. Stewart. He's a Scots-Irish-American. And again, he was a great businessman and a very good religious person as well. And I started to read it and I thought, this is really interesting. I really was enjoying it. I mean, I actually enjoy reading biographies and autobiographies. I always have. And I think you can't help but learn from them. And so I thought, well, this is good. So that's why I've put that up on the site. The next one I've talked about is this was actually a chapter. It's called Influence of Scottish Graduates Outside Scotland in the 19th Century. It's actually a chapter which has been taken from the history of Scottish medicine. And I got to tell you, as I was reading it, I mean, I wasn't many pages through it when I was just gobsmacked at what these Scots, in most cases, but also people that just studied at our universities, did all over the world. I mean, these are amazing people. We've got even Victoria Cross recipients amongst these medical people. And again, just reading that single chapter just opens your eyes to what Scotland was able to do in that period of time. And then the next article I got, these are occasional articles we get, is we've got a section called Robert Burns Lives. And this is edited by Frank Shaw, who is a Scots-American in Atlanta in Georgia. I believe he's relocated actually. He's still there, but he's moved to the Lakes, I believe, since he's retired now. But we've got, this is his 254th chapter of his Robert Burns Lives series. And this one's about Abraham Lincoln and Robert Burns, and it's by an author called Alex Ross. I take part responsibility for this one because I read his article in the Orkney newspaper, which I thought was brilliant, and I emailed it to Frank, and he thought it was great. He said, can we get permission? So I wrote to the Orkney Jar saying, could you please pass this email to Alex to see if we can get permission to put it on Robert Burns Lives? And she very kindly did do that for me. And Alex got in touch and said, yeah, please use it, no problem. So that's the basis of this story. And of course, Frank always gives you some background information about it. And on the actual article itself, when you read it, you'll see he's got a scan of the $5 bill with Abraham Lincoln on the front, which has been defaced by graffiti. So that's a bit of an historical copy of the $5 bill there. Then we've got the NFU annual report. This is the National Farmers Union in Scotland. I'd happened to find a copy of their 216 annual report. So I thought, I read through it, and I was pretty interested in the subjects they're talking about. It's obviously that one of the things they're talking about is Brexit, but a lot of other things which apply very much to the farming industry. So again, I thought that would make it an interesting read, and I've made it available. So click the link and you can read the PDF file. And finally, the last article I put up is about energy storage with wind power. This is, I think I've been talking about this a few times, because remember I've got the Scottish Innovation Party section of the site, and that's where I'm trying to put new thinking up. I'm not saying everything that's there could be used in Scotland, but what I'm saying is wherever I read an article anywhere in the world that I think could be applied to Scotland, I'll put it up. And then if people read it, they think, no, that wouldn't work in Scotland and for this reason. Or people might say, yes, this would work in Scotland. We must talk about it and consider it with our energy policy and stuff. So that's what I've always been trying to do with that Scottish Innovation Party bit. It's wherever I read articles in the world that I think could be applicable and useful to Scotland, I make sure I put them up. And I put some videos and stuff in there. So, and finally, of course, I've taken these last several months to give you a bit of a story to read. Sometimes the stories are quite long, maybe a chapter of a book type of thing, and sometimes they're a bit longer than that, in which case I might take a section of that story but put a link to where you can read the balance of it. But it's big enough to have a good read. And the story this time is Historians and the Scottish-American Connection. Again, it's when you're talking about the Scots in America, you're also talking about the Scots-Irish, because after all, the Scots-Irish were Scots that actually went to Ulster, settled there over several centuries for that matter, and eventually left for America in big numbers. And so the numbers of Scots-Irish are probably larger than just the Scots and the Highlanders. But it's part of our story, essentially. And so this, again, I thought was interesting, because it tells you where people went and whatnot. And of course, the reason I chose that is that it does end up by complementing the Robert Burns article, in which they're talking about Abe Lincoln, because Edinburgh was the first city outside of America to actually build a statue for Abe Lincoln. And the story ends about that wee story about that. So I thought you'd find that interesting. As I say, I put a link to the whole article if you'd like to read more. And so that's what the newsletter is about this particular week. And as I say, I'm going to post it on YouTube, and I'll put a link under the video so you can actually go and get a copy of the actual newsletter itself. So I hope you'll find that interesting, and perhaps let me know if you like it. If you do, I'll attempt to do one every week as the introduction to the newsletter. So thanks for listening, and look forward to hearing from you.